could you tell us a little bit about your own personal journey that brought you to the position of being the United Nations Special Envoy for the Food System Summit?
I was born in Uganda, where my parents were refugees. So I grew up in a refugee camp until I finished my PhD. So yeah. And I can say that because I guess back then in those olden days, UNHCR was still generous enough to be able to find us land, have my parents settle. So we actually settled in Uganda and lived there. And again, and I was educated as in Uganda, and was able to go all the way to getting my PhD. I only went back to Rwanda, like most Rwandans, only recently. And I particularly went back after my PhD. So yes, then part of that is very important probably to my role is growing up in a refugee camp. There are so many things you get to know that, that so many things that other people take for granted, that you grow up to learn that actually you were denied all those things, number one. So it helps you appreciate that part of people's livelihoods. But also then my father was able to farm even as a refugee. So growing up as the daughter of a smallholder farmer that is able to get the basic necessities of life because my dad is benefiting from an agricultural sector, it really shaped my appreciation of the agricultural sector, number one, its criticality to survival for communities living in rural areas. Number two, the whole perspective of that smallholder environment, that refugee environment, created a passion in me around working with people and just saying no, knowing to at a very early age, really being able to know what to say no to. There are things we need to say no to, and part of that is just ensuring that mankind is treated right, and smallholder farmers and people that are excluded get the opportunities they need in life. So I would say that's what has shaped some of what I'm doing. And the rest has really been one thing after the other. I would even call it accidents of life. I mean, I didn't know that I would be a special envoy. I was asked, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? And I said, for me, it's a chance of a lifetime. It's the opportunity that I would be looking for to be able to do things that I know that the people I want to help would need, So that's how I ended up as special envoy.
So, yeah. So I've been following the story, your appointment, and the stories around the UN Food System Summit for quite a while. But my sense is that a lot of people don't know much about the UN Food System Summit or even what your role is. So, it's my next question is sort of a two-part one. Could you, in your own words, give us a sense of what the summit is and what your role is, and then maybe what you're trying to hope to achieve with this enormous summit that takes place in October of next year, I believe.
Yeah. So in 2015, the world came together and agreed that we need to put in place the SDGs. The SDGs recognizes a few things, some very basic human rights that we are not coming through on the right way, including access to food, including hunger, including nutrition. But we also know that there are a number of other things that are related to our environment that we must be able to fix in order to move forward. So we are in a place where we need to be achieving the SDGs. We just finished 5 years of SDGs. We have 10 years to go. Now, we need to do so much more to be able to come through on the SDGs because we are behind, we are off track on coming through on SDGs. So if we are going to do that, we need to do so much more. But we need to do it fully well, knowing that our food systems is not working. Our food system, how we produce food, how we transport it all the way to the fork, is contributing to climate change, is contributing to some of the challenges we have. We are wasting so much food in our system. So the Food System Summit recognizes primarily that we need to come through on SDGs. It's very critical, and in the next 10 years, but we must do it in the context of a food system that is sustainable and rather than a food system that is unsustainable. So that's what the Food System Summit is about. It was launched last year. It's coming through next year, September 2021. That's where it will be, when it will come through.
So
So
what do you think the big challenges then in the summit are going to be? I mean, there's so many players. I mean, the food system is not just one thing, of course. It's a huge number of players that all have to work together to move food from farm to fork and inputs onto farms and whatnot. What are the big challenges then? Do you think that the summit then will foreshadow, or that you can be meaningfully tackled in sort of the context of a summit?
So some of the most critical challenges, I might say, is we need to agree around what is important for these food systems, for us to come through the right way on the food systems. We need to take this conversation to everybody. We need to build the right level of consensus that we need to change, that this is not just another summit, that this is a summit that needs to ensure that we are changing our food system. So that's number one. Number two, we need to come up with tangible solutions around how we implement and tangible actions around how we come through. Number three, food systems are very local. Like you say, they're very local. They happen in different places of the world. They mean different things to different people. So being able to have food systems dialogues, like you were saying, and David Nabarro is at the center of the food systems dialogues, being able to have those dialogues and ensure that these conversations are happening for indigenous people, as they're happening for smallholder farmers, as they're happening for women, as they're happening for youth who are going to be the people that inherit this world and define how much further it can go. These conversations are very critical, and these are things, and being able to be sure that we are taking the criticality of what is at stake here, of the food systems and what we need to be achieving to all these groups of people as some of the challenges, but they are also the opportunities that the summit offers.
So that's super, and as you know, I'm really excited about this. You mentioned dialogues there, so maybe you can just give us a sense of what you think the lead up sort of to the summit should look like, and maybe a little bit about how people could get engaged with it, and also, I mean, this is COVID year, right? We can't get together. I mean, we're doing this interview over Zoom. We can't get together like we used to in face to face. So how do you build consensus around these things for the summit, especially given the challenges of the pandemic?
I mean, the pandemic has brought these type of challenges to us, but it's also brought opportunities. I mean, we get to talk to so many people in such a short period of time. And once we have a sense of what we need to be agreeing around, it's probably going to be much faster to build that level of consensus. But to go back to the dialogues, what we've decided is we are going to take these conversations at country level. We'll have dialogues at every country, and we'll structure them so that different groups of people in these countries have an opportunity to have a conversation. The idea is to make sure that each country can look at its challenges, but also the opportunities within which it has to deal with the food system, and then come up with action around those challenges. So the conversation that we are leading in these countries is really to make that conversation happen. Now, it's anchored around two things. It's anchored around the science that really talks about what type of food system we should be taking forward, where are we coming from, and where are we going? What food systems make sense as we go forward in different places of the world? So that science is already being done by a different group of people. They're analyzing what we need to be doing differently. They're analyzing what the implications are for our world and the type of trade-offs we have to deal with to be able to move forward. It has to be anchored in game-changing ideas, what we are calling action tracks. We have 5 action tracks, and these action tracks present an opportunity for us to look at really great ideas from different parts of the world that can start defining how we go forward within this food systems perspective. So there are a number of things to anchor in. There are already ideas and solutions that are coming from people, and that's the beauty of the summit. It provides an opportunity to bring in so many ideas from so many diverse groups, including your students, your university, everybody. Bring them in. Let them give their ideas. Some of them might be groundbreaking. So bringing these ideas on the table and ensuring that some of these dialogues are also taking these ideas on board. And that when we do come to the summit, we actually have sifted through many of these ideas and have a sense of what will work and what will take us forward in different parts of the world.
So it's so interesting. And maybe we shift from talking about the process of the summit to the substance of food systems. And you mentioned trade-offs there. And this is something that we talk about a lot, certainly in the conversations that I get to be involved in, because nothing in the world comes for free, unfortunately, and there always seems to be a trade-off somewhere. So what are the sort of trade-offs that you're tracking, or what are the things that under your action tracks that you think are really important trade-offs that we need to have consensus around and conversations around, because they are really hard?
There's so many things that we are doing right now for example, just to go straight to the point, if you look across each action track, there are some things we have to ask ourselves whether we are doing well or not doing well. The way we produce food, right, is contributing to climate change. So if we are going to shift in the way we produce food, there are businesses that profit from that. What are we going to do differently? So today, we have so much subsidies going into producing food, so that food can be much more affordable in different places. Are we going to rethink those subsidies and think about how those can be shifted into other ways of producing, into better ways of production that is safer for the environment, and production that, so that has to be thought through. The way we process food is impacting our health. 1 in every 3 people are obese, and it is based on how we eat. If we are going to be shifting this and asking private sector to shift some of these processing capabilities that they've already built, it's going to cost a lot in terms of how they remodel, they rebrand, they do whatever. But we need it for survival of mankind. We are losing so many people. We are losing so many people because of how we eat food. So those are trade-offs. Those are some of the trade-offs that we need to think about, and really think of how we start getting rid of them while thinking about how to support the groups that work in these environments. So I could go on, but those are just 2 of some of the examples.
Let me just stay on this one for another second. I mean, I come out of this from an environmental perspective. My PhD is in sustainable agriculture. I talk a lot about the hidden environmental costs of food production, and the fact that food production contributes to climate change. And then I always get the pushback, well, we can't raise costs because that will either hurt farm incomes or it will raise costs for consumers. And this is sort of where I get confused at this point. I feel myself that I run into a brick wall between the need to have our costs for food be fully representative of all the environmental costs of food production without imposing extra costs on farmers or extra costs on consumers, both of which are vulnerable groups. How does maybe the summit going to help us unpack that one? Because that one, I've been working at that one for 25 years and I've got no good answers.
I know, and I think sometimes it depends on which part of the world you're talking from. From my part of the world, climate change is costing us everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Our systems are not resilient enough. It's costing us everything. So every day you're seeing farmers and the nations move out of their capabilities to cope with climate change, to feed. 60 million more people are hungry compared to 5 years ago, despite all the efforts that we are putting in. So the cost is already huge. The cost is huge, and we are going to have to manage how, there's the immediate cost in our faces as we look at the environment we are working in, but there's also the cost to the rest of the world. And that's why this Food System Summit is so important. We are coming at it together, recognizing that there's no part of the world that is going to be better off than another part of the world if we don't work as a collective.
Yeah.
And really what you do in Canada will impact us here in Kenya, and vice versa. So our world has become that small, and we need to appreciate that and start working together on those costs, and where are we transferring costs from, and what are the implications, what are we saving and what are we losing. Those are some of the challenges we have to look at, the globalization of this problem.
Yeah, I'm so glad you just said that. So we've just gone through a pandemic, and I've been asked a lot in the last few months to talk about the effect of the pandemic on Canada's food system. Give us a global perspective on that. What have we learned about the food system in the last 8 months, specifically from your perspective, that maybe we can carry forward somehow?
I guess one of the things that the COVID-19 has highlighted in our food system is just how shaky the whole food system is. There are so many people that we are easy to throw off balance when it comes to a food system's perspective, mostly because then it became difficult. Food gets out of reach, or the quality of food gets out of reach. So you start compromising on your nutrition. So these vulnerabilities in our system, I mean, we really had no visibility, and we neither did we have visibility that it's a global problem. It's not just an African problem, or it's not a Canadian problem, it's a global problem. So that's one of the things that COVID-19 has done. That means that we need to do better at building resilience in our system. In the first place, COVID-19 being a zoonotic disease that is coming out of the perspective that we are probably crunching a little bit more than we should, is part of the problem as well. So I think here the critical thing is, let's look at the resilience that our systems need to be able to deliver better services, but also the resilience of people and inclusion, and ensuring that people are not so critically on the edge that they get completely thrown off board by a situation like COVID did.
Okay, so again, there's so much interesting stuff to talk about here. What then does resilience look like for you? I mean, how would you actually build resilience? It sounds great that we need more resilience. I completely agree. What does that actually mean on the ground for people or for institutions? What do we have to do to get resilient?
I guess there are so many things. I mean, when you look at what COVID did from a trade perspective, international trade perspective, so many of us depend on each other for food. We depend on Canada for food, for fish and so many things. This was impacted by COVID, as we started seeing trade impacted, as supply chains started being impacted, and now there's this whole question of should supply chains be shorter? Should we be investing more in short supply chains? So those are some of the things that get impacted, and those are some of the things that we need to think through. How do we build more resilience in our ability to work together from a trade perspective? Or do we need to build that resilience at local level? And again, that's a decision we all have to make together. It's not some decision we can walk away and say, oh, no. But it is true that right now people are looking at resilience at country level. They are worried about, how do I build resilience for my people from a trade perspective? But there's also the whole issue around, let's be more self-sufficient in food rather than depend on trade. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right thing to do from a food systems perspective. Food system really will benefit from optimization of what environment does what better, rather than trying to push environments to be self-sufficient. So resilience is going to vary from place to place. It's going to vary from household to household, as people have different means. It's going to vary from country to country. But I think most important is to make sure that we have a little bit more predictability and more stability in the system. That's what people are going to be looking for. If we can build that into something we share, like trade, so much the better. If we don't do it, people will come up with other solutions, and those solutions are probably not the best for our environment.
So I really agree with what you're saying, and I said something similar. I was doing some interviews over the summer about how the Canadian food system adapted to COVID, and I said something quite similar to what you just said, and I got a little bit of pushback, and it was the first comment you made, and it was that the system is been shown to not be very resilient, and in Canada, anyways, a lot of the folks in our industry are feeling pretty good that the system, and a phrase that I heard was, it bent but it didn't break. And that most, aside from people who had lost their jobs, which was a separate part of the problem, the system was pretty good at getting food off of farms, into processing houses, into grocery stores, and then we didn't see in Canada a lot of food price inflation, which you would sort of expect, I think, if the system was really falling apart. So is that just did Canada get off easy, or are we just lucky, or what was the experience maybe from other parts of the world that maybe aren't as resilient as we experienced?
First of all, definitely Canada's ability to get off easy is understood. You have systems that function, so that you have inbuilt resilience already that comes from some of the systems you've built. So that would be no great surprise. But also, let's be real. I mean, if this had happened in combination with something like, droughts like we've seen in other years, this would have been a completely different thing. Number three, I think people just were quick to respond in terms of once we figured out what we are dealing with, the bounce back wasn't as bad as it would have been. But it hasn't been that necessarily that easy for other countries. I mean, here in Africa is one of the things we've seen. We've been very lucky. Climate change didn't really come in this time, so our seasons have held. Most people have produced. Yes, markets were impacted and food became a little bit expensive, but still available. I think what's not working well is the whole global economy and how it could work for these countries, because now countries are suffering from access to funding as debt sustainability becomes a problem and access to financing becomes a problem. This is what some of these countries, so they can't plan better, they can't invest better, the whole global economy is shaken up. And some of these countries that depend on support of other countries are definitely suffering the most, or that depend on debt are suffering the most. So I think from a food perspective, household level food, not so badly affected. People that we are leaving out, we're depending on other people to produce food, especially the informal employment sector, a little bit affected by the price of food, but not as bad as it could have been. So I would say that the world has held up in general with regards to food.
Yeah, you know what? I've been pleasantly surprised that things have been as not bad as they've been. But okay, so for me and my observations in Canada, certainly, and I spent some time on a workshop last week with a group of charities doing emergency food aid, so food banks and community food centers. And I think the big food security story, at least from my perspective, doesn't relate to the farms or the processing or the supply chains, but actually relates to the economic fallout, which caused lost wages, unemployment, and that's what's made people suffer in Canada anyways, put people into food banks. We see food banks saying there's twice as many people going to them as there used to be. Food banks are reporting that that different types of people than they'd ever seen before are now needing to use emergency food aid. So that actually sounds like a very different kind of agenda or policies than the conversation about food and supply chains and international trade. So what recommendations do you have, or what thoughts do you have on the more sort of income-related, employment-related food security problem we've been seeing?
I mean, like you said, there's a whole lot of people that are employed in between real formal employment and the agriculture sector, you might say the food sector where food is being produced. Those people whose jobs are shaky, that need their jobs on a day-to-day basis to be able to feed their families, definitely, the rate of unemployment is unbelievable in many of these countries. Definitely, there has to be some form of social safety net that allows people to bounce back, that allows people to survive this period. Otherwise, it will become very difficult. I mean, we've seen some of that here in Africa, where SMEs that are employing people are not able to keep the people that they are employing. For us, what has worked probably is a huge part of our population does still depend on farming. And this population, you're praying, you're hoping that climate change doesn't impact them, because their capability to produce food is their biggest social safety net. So that has worked for them. So different parts of the world will require different types of investments. For the parts of the world where employment and access to employment is critical to livelihoods, social safety nets are going to be very important. For our part of the world where we still have a significant part of the population still living in agriculture, strengthening the capabilities and the resilience of the agricultural sector to support these people that still work in it is extremely important for for our countries to be able to continue to grow these sectors. We do have that challenge as well, but it's not as big. There's still a challenge. There's still a group of people that does fall in the bracket of people that you said, and those are going also to have to need social safety net, and some of our countries are doing that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So that's very, very similar to conversations, say, in Canada then about guaranteed incomes or universal basic income floors or things like that, establishing a good social safety net to help people who have lost their jobs or fall into precarious employment situations. You said some interesting things, and I'd like to go back to the agricultural theme, because that's where my background lies, and that's what I'm most excited personally about. And I'm just so curious to hear about you from the topic of agricultural technology and the way that agricultural technologies can, be deployed in a way that perhaps empowers the small scale farmers, like your father, I guess, was, and whatnot. And I'm getting a little concerned at some places that when I talk about agricultural technology, I get a lot of pushback from folks with small scale farming backgrounds that ag technology is really a big business agenda that doesn't help small scale farmers. And this is a tension that I have to navigate myself on a daily basis. I guess I'm asking you for some advice and some help on how to navigate that story. How do we use technology in a way that it helps the small scale farmer?
Yeah, I guess it depends on which part of the problem you're saying. It depends on which part of the world you're talking from. So from where we are sitting, agriculture technology is as basic as having a good variety of seed that has the capability to double or triple a farmer's yield. Now, you might say that is old, good old science or traditional science, but it is still a technology, and it does deliver better yields to farmers. So for these farmers who live in these environments, having ability to have improved seeds that can deal with pests and diseases is great, and it does double their incomes, does triple their incomes. Being able to deal with the nutrient capabilities of soils so that they are able to have better yields because they've used some nutrients where erosion and all this has already happened is still critical to better yields. So that's your good old science. But there's a different side of technology. There's the different side of technology that probably your farmers are referring to is precision technology, where you now have your huge tractors are busy driving themselves out there, doing all the agriculture they need to do, and big data that is really critical to how this farming is done. That is very critical, to where the world is going. But still, again, it is working for businesses that are able to afford those type of technologies. It definitely would be very difficult. It would be a stretch unless invested in from a public perspective for some of our businesses. What is beginning to work, though, what you'd call middle of the road for all these things, is even in Africa here, we are seeing the opportunity for using digitization and big data to be able to provide better services to farming communities and to communities in general, to be able to get information out there faster, be able to get services out there faster. And the one that stands out for me, that really is a good case, is, for example, the use of mobile services, mobile telephone services to move money around so that people don't have to touch money during COVID times. Now, cashless money, cashless movement of money has become such a big deal, and that wouldn't have been possible without these technologies that are coming in through digitization. But they're also becoming very critical to how we provide agricultural services. And yet, this is a very smallholder environment where this is working. So it's going to be, again, which technology where, for which community, and what purpose. I would say for us, some of these technologies that are increasing farmers' yields, that are providing better services to farmers, are very critical to efficiency and to affordability of services here. And yes, there are going to be big time technologies that will work for companies that can afford them, but that's not where we are at. But I'm sure, that impacts many of the people you're working with.
So I really appreciate that answer, and it resonates with some experiences that I've had in Malawi and in Rwanda and a few other places in the so-called global south or developing world. That said, I keep getting pushback on this topic that too often especially the capital-intensive technologies become co-opted by corporate interests, and they get embroiled in the politics of technology, because technologies are never inert. They always seem to have a political element to them. And I've even, and maybe we can just talk about this directly, I've even heard that the concern from some people that the food summit is in the possibility to be dominated by corporate voices and not give expression. So maybe you can give us a sense of what the Food Summit will do in order to sort of make sure that the small scale farmers and the needs of the small technologies, that the not capital intensive huge robots, will be able to be alongside all the other kinds of technologies and give voice to the whole thing.
I'm not sure that the corporate interests that are out there need the Food System Summit. I think it's the reverse. The Food System Summit need all these corporates to look in the mirror and ask themselves whether what we are doing from an environmental perspective is the right thing for our environment, whether what we are doing from a people perspective is the right thing for people, and start working with all of us to see the type of shifts we need to make to get to a better and more sustainable world. So we need them to engage, but they're not the only ones we need. We need indigenous people. They're the biggest custodians of our environment today. They conserve biodiversity in ways that no other community is able to. We need smallholder farmers. They are using land, and this land has capability to degrade so fast if they don't do the right thing. So we need everybody. We need consumers. Consumers determine, they eat 3 times a day. They determine how we use our food system. They determine what type of food we all grow and get to their tables. So they determine how we use resources from the environment. So it's not corporates, it's not consumers, it's not indigenous people, it's all of us. We need to understand that this is a summit that needs all of us to engage, because it's something that touches each and everybody of us. And we are, and the shift, and an appropriate shift, will come from the engagement of everybody, not from engagement of one person. Just like we are taking dialogues to every country and trying to take this conversation to everybody, this is something we are encouraging everybody to participate in. That's generally we can get a solution that will work for all of us.
Well, I applaud that, and you certainly have a friend and an ally in the Arrow Food Institute to push those dialogues out. So 2 last questions from me. First of all, very specifically, what would you like individuals, community groups, large organizations, governments to do, both in general in terms of the big agenda of food systems transformation, but also specifically with regard to the lead up to the summit?
So we all have different roles, and I'll come to individual roles, but we all have different roles, right? So for governments, one of the things I would like to see our governments do is to engage around what is it that we need to be fixing around the food systems, what is the right thing to do, given the fact that we are recognizing that this needs to be fixed, where we are going needs to be fixed. So we have a responsibility to people. We have a leadership responsibility to make sure that we come through on the food system side. As businesses, we need to listen. We need to know whether what we are doing works for us, because without a sustainable environment, you have no business environment. So this can only work probably for a few more days, but you want to leave this business probably to the next generation. How will you do that if you're not looking at a food systems perspective? So as an indigenous community, as wherever, like I said before, as smallholder farmers, what do we do to ensure that we are doing the right thing? I mean, we need to come at it from that perspective. And I would just like to request that we all get engaged in trying to educate ourselves around the value and the importance of the summit. That's the reason the summit was launched in the first place. That's the reason the Secretary General requested for the summit. Reach out to everybody, find ways of bringing everybody in, ensure a global conversation, but also ensure that we come forward together on a consensus around what must change. And let's do it together. So individually, we need to wake up every day knowing that every decision we make impacts our food system. So let's educate ourselves, let's understand a little bit more, and let's know, just like we make an effort to try to save the light in our environment, to try to save the water in our environment, let's do something about our food systems as well.
Oh, that is a wonderful, wonderful thought. And my last question to you, things seem very dark at this moment in history. You've got a global perspective and obviously a lot of enthusiasm and energy. To finish off, what gives you hope in this challenging moment of time?
I mean, one of the things that I look at is every time mankind has been pushed on the edge, put in a situation where it had to come up with a solution, there's always there's some form of light at the end of the tunnel. We grab it, we take it, we make use of it, we become innovative and creative, and we thrive and we get out of it. What gives me hope is that as people, we have that capability in us. We know how to survive. We are survivors. So, and the survival we need here is working on a food system that will take us into the future. You know, that it's built in our genes. It's who we are. We know how to survive. We can survive this, and we can do this. And my job is just to make sure that we bring this conversation, but also the urgency to everybody, so that we can have this conversation together.
Super duper. Thank you very much, Dr. Kalibata. What a privilege and an honor for me. I learned a lot. Unfortunately, I couldn't take a lot of notes because I had to stare at the camera and I'd be people texting me, but I'm really going to listen to this again, and I'm very grateful.